The state is the ultimate arbiter in every case of conflict that arises, including conflicts involving the state itself. Now, if you hear this type of definition, you immediately realize that this is a very unique type of institution. Just imagine that you get together with some friends and suggest that as a solution of social problems, in every case of conflict that I have with you, I will be the ultimate judge who is right and wrong, including also in cases of conflict that I start with you. This is why all states are interested in taxation. We all know that if we have a conflict with the state that the state has actually caused, it is agents of the state that then decide whether they were right in hitting you on the head or they were not right, and you can predict, of course, what their decision by and large will be. Taxation. If such an institution exists, and it does exist, then the consequence will be continuous expropriation and exploitation of property owners. So there is then an alternative source of income to the state besides taxes, and that is trying to gain control over the production of money itself. This is why all states are interested in taxation. We all know that if we have a conflict with the state that the state has actually caused, it is agents of the state that then decide whether they were right in hitting you on the head or they were not right, and you can predict, of course, what their decision by and large will be.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the No Way Jose podcast. I am Jose Galison, your host. Today, I will be joined by Toad. You can follow him on Twitter at LearnToToad. No ad read for today. The old sponsor is taking the month off. But if you are interested, if you have a product that you think I'd be interested in and you'd like to promote, and if you think we have similar values, feel free to hit me up. My email is thelibertymovementglobal@gmail.com. Yeah, I know, awful email from an old project, but hey, it is what it is. Or you can hit me up on Twitter at TowerGangJose. I am, reach out to me. I am always looking. Or if you just want to support the show and, keep it so that I don't do sponsors, keep it ad free, go to patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. With that, let's go ahead and get Toad in here and let's get into part 19 of a live reading of Democracy, the God That Failed. We'll be getting into today the ills of classical liberalism. What is up, Toad? Pleasure to have you back, my friend.
What's up? Nice for having me back.
Hell yeah. I mean, I know it'd be weird to have somebody else at this point. We're almost 20 episodes in, so I think I'm stuck with you at this point. I think we're probably in the less than 10, maybe more than 5 episodes range, somewhere that we're done.
Yeah.
It is interesting how we've taken this series, I think, and drawn it out. I think it's been we've been doing essentially political theory analysis at wildly different points in the political landscape of our country. We are currently, it's June 23rd when we're recording this. We just, a couple days ago, we bombed Iran. So we're in unique times. It'll be fun to see where we're at when this thing is done. So, Toad, fun times. You ready to get into it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, John McCain is loving this right now from hell.
Yeah, it's totally checks out. But with that, let's go ahead and get into. We're into a new chapter, chapter 11, on the errors of classical liberalism and the future of liberty. I think we'll probably knock out the first half of this chapter, and the second part will be covered in the next episode, likely. But with that, I guess I'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Toad. Let you start, and we'll get into this chapter.
All right. I mean, obviously, I'll just say I do have my beefs with classical liberalism. Obviously, I think as you kind of progress to, sort of, at least I have progressed to like the sort of the Pete Q known as like wing of the liberty sphere, if you even want to call it that at this point, post-libertarianism, whatever, and you realize how many problems there are with classical liberalism, basically. And of course, we go up against the classical liberal caucuses of the Libertarian Party and whatever, and that's what we're going to be getting into in this chapter, I think, primarily. So, yeah, let's get into it. Page 221 is where we're at here. Classical liberalism has been in decline for more than a century. Since the second half of the 19th century, in the U.S. as well as in Western Europe, public affairs have increasingly been shaped instead by socialist ideas. In fact, the 20th century may well be described as the century par excellence of socialism, of communism, fascism, National Socialism, and most enduringly of social democracy, modern American liberalism, and neoconservatism.
I'm trying to think if there's really anything to say. There's obviously not much to be. It's just kind of introductory paragraph. I'll go ahead and get into the next one. To be sure, this decline has not been a continuous one. Matters did not always become worse from a liberal viewpoint. There were also some reprieves. As a result of World War II, for instance, West Germany and Italy experienced significant liberalization in comparison to the status quo ante under National Socialism and fascism. Similarly, the collapse of the communist Soviet Empire in the late 1980s has led to a remarkable liberalization across Eastern Europe. However, as much as liberals welcomed these events, they were not indicative of a renaissance of liberalism. Rather, the liberalization of Germany and Italy in the aftermath of World War II and the current post-communist liberalization of Eastern Europe were the outcome of external and accidental events, of military defeat and/or outright economic bankruptcy. It was in each case liberalization by default of the old system, and the default option adopted subsequently was simply a variant of socialism. Social democracy as exemplified by the U.S. as the only surviving, not yet militarily defeated or economically bankrupt superpower. I don't know if you have any thoughts at this point. We're still kind of in the preamble, which I don't know really much commentary there is for that.
I mean, he's just going over some of the history, talking about how social democracies have been sort of increasing, like in the Western world, throughout the last couple of centuries, really. And he's saying that that's not a good thing. And I'm kind of thinking he's almost differentiating between this form of liberalization and classical liberalism, even though he's going to be bashing both, I believe, if I remember correctly. So
yeah, we're gonna have to probably give it a minute to him to explain himself a little bit, because I do think he does tend to define liberalism, classical liberalism, even different than a lot of our contemporaries might describe classical liberalism. Even ironically, the classical you mentioned, like the classical liberal caucus and stuff. Ironically, I think even I know they tend to position themselves as champions of Mises, but I think even Mises would not accept that lot. And I think they're not particularly really even what Hoppe might be talking about when he says classical liberal. So we have to be careful with our words and kind of almost give him a chance to explain specifically what he means. I know earlier in this book he did, but I forget exactly. And it is like, is he meaning, because at this time too, I believe when he wrote this book, there was the colloquialism of liberal too. So it is like he's aware of both. So.
Right. He's talking about, I think when he's talking about classical liberalism, he's talking about sort of like people like Bastiat, like people who were actually in the French government. So they weren't like anarchists or anything like that, but they were liberals basically. And a lot of modern libertarians will like kind of draw from that. And yeah, there's definitely benefit in reading Bastiat. He's got a lot of good stuff. But as you sort of get into this, like kind of hold that up to what the reality of the situation is, you kind of see that there are, even though Bastiat, guys like that make a lot of good points, there are problems here. Like, yes, they want to minimize the government, but you will see that there are issues, especially in that classical liberalism sort of roots itself still in like egalitarianism and tolerance, which I think is a problem. And I think that it basically leads to not gatekeeping any of the left, like out of a movement that I think is indeed right wing. So that's basically what I have to say about that.
Yeah, but just for the people, obviously, if you're part 19 in this series, I think you are aware. But especially when he's speaking classical liberalism, he's definitely not referring to modern liberals. He's more referring to as you said, the Bastiats, the old, what we think of the old timers when it comes to liberty, like the progenitors of the concept of liberty and stuff. Like before we got to, I guess, the specific degree we have till where you get to like things like libertarianism, Hoppeanism. We're getting very, very, very specific. Liberalism is kind of more of a broad generalization, freedom, rah-rah. I mean, there's different interpretations of it. Thus, even if liberals have enjoyed a few periods of reprieve, ultimately the displacement of liberalism by socialism has been complete. Indeed, so complete has been the socialist victory that today, at the beginning of the 21st century, some neoconservatives have waxed triumphantly about the end of history and the arrival of the last man, i.e. the last millennium of global U.S.-supervised social democracy and a new socio-democraticus.
Homo socio-democraticus.
Yeah.
It is very gay.
Yeah. I think this is he kind of gets at the point we were getting at a little bit. He's talking about the displacement of liberalism with socialism, and I think he's kind of getting at how liberalism cedes ground to libertinism, and then I think libertinism kind of naturally, essentially, because that's essentially libertarianism embracing the decivilization, essentially embracing decivilizing forces, essentially like degenerate acts, and that's going to eventually result in just through and through liberals, and even then just devaluing your society. So it only makes sense that they would that one leads to the other. So if you do have a liberalism that cedes ground to, if it is this, we're going to super value this idea of like be free, you can do whatever you want, that is going to naturally, accidentally lead to things like libertinism, and then therefore degeneracy, and what falls from that is socialism, communism, i.e. these are kind of almost these are almost as synonyms for decivilizing forces, essentially.
Yeah,
but anyways,
I think he would say, socialism, he's referring to essentially, the government obviously having control of the means of production. Essentially, I don't really think there's that much of a difference between socialism and communism, really. So I think
exactly.
Basically he's referring to it as that, and I think essentially he has said in this book like many times that does have an effect on the culture, and like you said, that does lead to more degeneracy and decivilization.
Yeah. All right. On to part 2. Even if one regards the Hegelian aspirations of this interpretation as preposterous, according to which liberalism marks only a transitory stage in the evolution of the fully developed social democratic man, liberals still must be pained at the mere appearance of truth of neoconservative philosophizing, nor can they console themselves with the knowledge that social democracy also is bound to collapse economically. They knew that communism had to collapse, but when it did, this did not inaugurate a liberal renaissance. There is no a priori reason to assume that the future breakdown of social democracy will bear any more favorable results.
Yeah, so he's especially talking about the Soviet Union, of course, was the biggest example of a communist government that collapsed, and basically it collapsed essentially under its own weight because it's a totally unstable system. So they had to, obviously we know the Soviet Union broke up into many countries, whatever, which I think we would say is an improvement. He would say that it's an improvement, but I think that kind of the point that's kind of buried in here is that it's like just people have a tendency to reform a government. Like they look for leaders over and over again. It's kind of just this constant push against that tendency. Basically, if you want liberty, there's always that push against that. But I don't think that you can completely avoid it, to be honest. Which is that's a reality that you come to. You realize that, you're never going to actually have an anarchist society on a grand scale. So what do we do about that?
Mm-hmm. All right, on to you, buddy. The next few pages are yours.
All right. Assuming that the course of human history is determined by ideas rather than blind forces, and historical changes are the result of ideological shifts in public opinion, it follows that the socialist transformation of the last 100 years must be understood as the result of liberalism's intellectual, philosophical, and theoretical defeat, i.e., the increasing rejection in public opinion of the liberal doctrine as faulty. In this situation, liberals can react in two ways. On the one hand, they may still want to maintain that liberalism is a sound doctrine and that the public rejects it in spite of its truth. In this case, one must explain why people cling to false beliefs, even if they are aware of correct liberal ideas. Does the truth not always hold its own attraction and rewards? Furthermore, one must explain why the liberal truth is increasingly rejected in favor of socialist falsehoods. Did the population become more indolent or degenerate? If so, how can this be explained? On the other hand, one may consider the rejection as indicative of an error in one's doctrine. In this case, one must reconsider its theoretical foundations and identify the error, which can account not only for the doctrine's rejection as false, but more importantly, for the actual course of events. In other words, the socialist transformation must be explained as an intelligible and systematically predictable progressive deconstruction and degeneration of liberal political theory, originating in and logically arising from this error as the ultimate source of all subsequent socialist confusion.
So right here, what he's grappling with totally is the myth that we're told, the progressive myth. He's not saying it right here, but literally this is the progressive myth of history, that how history moves like arcs in the favor of positive. And the idea here is, and this is kind of, we've already covered it, I believe, in previous chapters. The whole idea here he's saying is that World War II was a massive decivilizing force. That going from monarchy to democracy was a big backslide. It was not a positive move. And so essentially what he's refuting is the progressive myth that things improve. And so now what he's saying is, essentially he's saying, hey, all right, it's pretty clear to the world that liberalism swept the world in the advent of World War II.
World War
and I think
One,
it's
really. It was
World War One, World War Two. Yeah, actually, I misspoke too. I meant to say World War One because World War One's where the monarchies toppled, not World War Two. But whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But you fucked up my train of thought. Where was that? Anyways, the progressive myth. This is the idea here is that liberalism. I think it's undeniable that liberalism, post World War One, World War Two, kind of swept the swept the region, swept the area, Europe. Just monarchies got replaced for democracies. Democracies became liberal. This became, kind of the one of the main tenets of democracies. Oh, we're liberal democracies. Liberalism swept the area, and now we're in this position where it's kind of undeniable when you look at things like neoconservative, especially around the time this book was written. There was just there's clearly a rot. I believe when was this written? This was written around. I believe it was around the Terror Wars, somewhere in that realm.
2000, somewhere in that ballpark. I forget.
So yeah, I believe it was post Terror Wars.
Might have been 2001 then. I forget. Yeah. Somewhere in the really early 2000s, though. I'm pretty sure.
Either way, he's making the point that clearly where we were at that point when the book was written, and I'd say even now, it's pretty clear that something went wrong. So you have to kind of grapple with that. And if what you're saying is liberalism is this major force, it's okay, well then either liberalism failed or. Essentially, that's what all the number of questions he went through all of this. So we have to grapple with something, and he's kind of making the point there's some sort of error somewhere in the logic of liberalism, and that's what we're going to dig at.
Right. So, yeah, I forget what he says that it is, although in my opinion, I already pointed out that the flaw in liberalism would be the fact that it is egalitarian in nature, and it does not keep out those forces, and that actually is that is what leads to socialism, because egalitarianism, if you want to make everybody equal, it's going to require those types of forces, like government forces, to try to force everybody to be equal, and everybody clearly is not equal. Everybody has individual differences. I don't know if I'm sure
there's a reason why liberal and democracy go hand in hand, because that is what democracy is at its core. It's an egalitarian, at least it's trying to preach the concept of egalitarianism, while ironically democracies are almost never actually egalitarian in any sort of real sense. They're very much authoritarian. It's not to say egalitarian is a good thing, but you're preached as, oh, everyone will be equal, and then no, you still end up with a ruling class and you're way poor.
Yeah, right. So yeah, he's saying there is some core problem with liberalism, which he's going to get into further. And in that paragraph there, he was talking about how people react in one of two ways, where they'll either not even acknowledge that there is an error, and they'll keep wanting to prop that up because like this is their ideology. And I actually think most people fall into that camp, because it is really hard to break somebody's worldview, and for somebody to actually admit, like, I got this completely wrong, my worldview was wrong. A lot of people are not that malleable, so I think probably more people fall into that camp than the other camp, which is the acknowledgement that, yes, there is something wrong here, and maybe we should, try something different, which that is the better camp to belong to. But I think the majority of people do not, unfortunately.
All right, let's go ahead and get into part 3.
All right. Liberalism's central and momentous error lies in its theory of government. All right. Classical liberal political philosophy, as personified, it's almost a tongue twister, personified by Locke, and most prominently displayed in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, was first and foremost a moral doctrine. Drawing on the philosophy of the Stoics and late Scholastics, it's centered around the notions of self-ownership, original appropriation of nature-given, unowned resources, property and contract as universal human rights implied in the nature of man qua rational animal. In the environment of princely and royal rulers, this emphasis on the universality of human rights placed the liberal philosophy naturally in radical opposition to every established government. For a liberal, every man, whether king or peasant, was subject to the same universal and eternal principles of justice, and a government either could derive its justification from a contract between private property owners, or it could not be justified at all. But could any government be so justified?
Bingo. I mean, and that's what we're about to get into. And I don't even recall how he says, the liberal answer course, comes to this. But frankly, that is kind of, let's be real, that is kind of the like, in a modern day, especially someone who calls himself a classical liberal. Like even the old classical liberals, I guess, with the exception of Mises, and actually I don't even know if Mises would consider himself an anarchist. They were generally speaking all people who fell into the liberals. There's no, you just can't even understand the conception of a liberal anarchist. Like that's just like a classically liberal anarchist. Like typically speaking, what a classical liberal is, they've found some way to understand some corresponding of like these beliefs in liberty and somehow finding a way to make that work with government. Now, don't get me wrong, there are small people, there are also are people who call themselves big L libertarians or whatever, but even then, I'd say a lot of times, even then, the big L libertarians won't like acknowledge a lot of times that it's like, that it's, I don't know, that maybe, I don't know, I guess some of them are minarchists, I guess is the point, but there's definitely very common that like that is with classical liberalists, like they're not ever anarchists, so I think that's kind of the commonality. I think that's kind of what he's getting at here, which we're about to get into.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people that call themselves like the classical liberal caucus now are essentially like neoliberals.
Exactly.
They essentially they just side with the regime, the government on everything. What he's saying in that paragraph, like he's talking about natural law and stuff and, natural acquisition of property and stuff, but he is basically just talking about classical liberalism being about property rights. So it's almost like he's talking about it like it is libertarianism, and he's calling it a moral doctrine, which I might push back on that a little bit. Like I think it's more of a legal framework than anything else, which is kind of, that is like part of the downfall of it to me with libertarianism and classical liberalism basically, is that it's like, if you're saying that it's just going to tell you, well, it's immoral or really illegal to violate somebody else's property, well, okay, sure, yeah, that's true. But like, where do you get like this moral grounding? Because people will just take the NIP and the NAP, the NIP, the NAP, the NAP, and they'll just twist it to just adhere to whatever their beliefs are, right? They'll look at like some of these people on the left will look at like trans and kids or something and be like, oh, that's not an NAP violation or something like that. So it's like, well, what is the point of having this at all then? You know what I mean? If you're just going to bastardize this, there needs to be something else, which I would say is Christianity, which, I mean, that's my thought on the whole thing. You need this like moral underpinning. I'm not sure that he's going to go there with it. I forget.
Well, I mean, think anyone, really, if you have a political theory, if you're looking for some sort of all-encompassing theory of everything, I'm sorry, you're going to be out of luck. But yeah, libertarian theory is just that, libertarian theory. It's a legal theory. You're definitely going to need some sort of undergirding of your moral theory, Anyone in any time is going to need that, because it's like, even within libertarianism, there's the argument between like consequentialists or what's a deontologic, whatever,
it's
the
basically,
fuck I mean.
Deontological versus utilitarian, basically.
Yeah, so that's always going to be, there's always going to be deeper levels you can go to. Hell, we can get to the point where we're talking about solipsism. We're like, how can we even know anything? Am I a head in a vat? But yes, it is obviously libertarianism is what it is. It's a legal theory. I get what you're saying about saying it's a moral doctrine. It's kind of weird to describe what sounds like a legal doctrine, call it moral doctrine, but maybe he'll get into that. Because I think maybe that's kind of what he's saying. Maybe there's an implication there's like a moral value being added, and that's kind of a poison pill in there. But I don't know. I
haven't read this chapter in a long time, but yeah.
So let's go ahead and get into the next paragraph.
Yeah, and he is also sort of saying that there is like an egalitarian sort of line throughout this whole thing where he's saying, well, this same ideology or moral doctrine is what he's saying here applies to everybody, whether they're the ruler or the ruled. And yeah, that's true. Everybody's human and this does apply to everybody, but I think kind of thinking that way kind of puts you in the wrong mindset, essentially, where I think it's going to make you have a tendency to apply this egalitarian way of thinking to like other things. So I think that's kind of a problem. But I'm talking about my way of thinking here, not necessarily Hoppe. But all right,
let's go on.
The affirmative liberal answer is well known. It's set out from undeniably true. What am I reading here? It's set out from the undeniably true proposition that mankind, being what it is, murderers, robbers, thieves, thugs, and con artists will always exist, and life in society will be impossible if they are not threatened with physical punishment. In order to maintain a liberal social order, liberals insisted it is necessary that its members be in the position to pressure, by threatening or applying violence, anyone who does not respect the life and property of others to acquiesce to the rules of society. From this correct premise, liberals concluded that this indispensable task of maintaining law and order is the unique function of government. Yeah. So, right. So essentially, right there, he's basically saying that,
Minarchist,
Well, yeah, he's, that's sort of just it's kind of a standard libertarian line there, or way of thinking there, where he's basically just saying, well, you do need to be able to defend your property with violence. Like, we all know this. It's just
so therefore, who has
that task, right? And he's saying that, I guess, the liberal way of thinking is that, well, you need a government to do those duties.
You need someone who has a monopoly on violence. Otherwise, there's going to be all sorts of groups that are the ones who perpetrate violence, and then it'll get all out of whack. And because you need one person who's the ultimate arbiter, of all of this, and that's the government. So that's what this argument comes to. Yeah.
Right. Which, interestingly, the next chapter in this book is him talking about the private solutions to that, private defense, essentially, which is a big topic of his. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Whether this conclusion is correct or not hinges on the definition of government. It is correct if government simply means any individual or firm that provides protection and security services to a voluntary paying clientele of private property owners. However, this was not the definition of government adopted by liberals. For a liberal, government is not simply a specialized firm. Rather, government possesses two unique characteristics. Unlike a normal firm, it possesses a compulsory territorial monopoly of jurisdiction, ultimate decision-making, and the right to tax. However, if one assumes this definition of government, then the liberal conclusion is false. It does not follow from the right and need for the protection of person and property that protection rightfully should or effectively can be provided by a monopolist of jurisdiction and taxation. To the contrary, it can be demonstrated that any such institution is incompatible with the rightful and effective protection of property. So more on the point that they have accepted the poison pill of minarchy, and it's corrupting everything that comes out from it.
Right. Yeah. He's basically just elaborating. Yeah. On that point. Like. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if I have anything else to say about that, other than
Exactly,
obviously
yeah.
the point there at the very end there is that it's basically it's hypocritical in a way, because if you concede that, well, this monopoly on violence essentially is the institution that should be enforcing property rights or whatever. Well, how can they do that when they're violating property rights by existing, essentially by taxing the people? So yeah, that's the point that he's making there.
According to liberal doctrine, private property rights logically and temporally precede any government. They are the result of acts of original appropriation, production, and/or exchange from prior to later owner, and concern the owner's right to exclusive jurisdiction over definite physical resources. In fact, it is the very purpose of private property to establish physically separate domains of exclusive jurisdiction in order to avoid possible conflicts concerning the use of scarce resources. No private property owner can possibly surrender his right to ultimate jurisdiction over and physical protection of his property to someone else unless he sells or otherwise transfers his property, in which case someone else gains exclusive jurisdiction over it. Every property owner may partake of the advantages of the division of labor, however, and seek more or better protection of his property through cooperation with other owners and their property. Every property owner may buy from, sell to, or otherwise contract with anyone else concerning more or better property protection, and every property owner may at any time unilaterally discontinue any such cooperation with others or change his respective affiliations. Thus, in order to meet the demand for protection, it would be rightfully possible and is economically likely that specialized individuals or agencies would arise which would provide protection, insurance, and arbitration services to a voluntary clients for a fee. Essentially, he's just saying the free market will provide.
Yeah, I mean, he's actually he's kind of tying together the previous chapter and the next chapter into this here, where he's talking about, again, that there would be private like defense firms, essentially, that one would basically pay or whatever to provide, their property protection for them. And in the previous chapter, he was talking about sort of like the covenant communities and stuff, where he's sort of making that point again here, where basically like, yeah, you as an individual person, you don't necessarily have to be the only person responsible for defending your own property, right? Like maybe you're not good at that. Maybe you're a weak, fat guy like me, right? So maybe you want to hire somebody else to be in charge of that and defend your property. So maybe you enter into some covenant community or something like that, and you agree to these terms and whatever, and there's one person who's better at that, that's in charge of that whole community, and he's the one that's in charge of setting up, how the defense of that property is going to work, right? So again, it's cooperation. Like, we're not atomized individuals, which libertarians sort of get that wrong quite a bit as well. Like, it's not individualistic to the point where you're not supposed to just not cooperate with anybody else. You need to cooperate. You have to participate in the market, which, that's a whole other thing where I get into, well, like, every aspect of the market is infiltrated by government at this point, so you have to kind of acknowledge that. And, it's, to some extent, you do have to sort of play the game in a way, unless you're an agorist like you. But, which, yeah, I mean, I have my issues with that too, just because I think you just can't, I don't know. I just don't see a way of building like every single industry up in a parallel fashion, but that's a whole different thing. But yeah, I'm rambling too much tonight, Jose.
No, you're good. You're good. We're only like 2 paragraphs out. So if anything, the rambling's good to squeeze that last. We're at this odd spot where, I don't know, I can't do the whole chapter and I don't want to dig into it because it'll make us stop at a weird spot next episode. So
right.
I know it's just going to be an oddly short episode probably, but let's keep going. While it is easy to conceive of the contractual origin of a system of competitive security suppliers, it is inconceivable how private property owners could possibly enter a contract which entitled an other agent to compel anyone within a given territory to come to it exclusively for protection and judicial decision-making, barring any other agent from offering protection services. Such a monopoly contract would imply that every private property owner had surrendered his right to ultimate decision-making and the protection of his person and property permanently to someone else. In effect, in transferring this right onto someone else, a person would submit himself into permanent slavery. According to liberal doctrine, any such submission contract is from the outset impermissible, hence null and void, because it contradicts the praxeological foundation of all contracts, i.e., private property and individual self-ownership. No one rightfully can or likely will agree to render his person and property permanently defenseless against the actions of someone else. Similarly inconceivable is the notion that anyone would endow his monopolistic protector with a permanent right to tax. No one can or will enter a contract that allowed a protector to determine unilaterally, within consent of the protected, the sum that the protected must pay for his protection. Now, this kind of gets into the ironic libertarian argument that always comes up, selling oneself into slavery, and how it's technically impossible. If you understand how private property works, how self-ownership works, you literally cannot. Like, that is the base, that is the atomized unit. Like, if we're looking at economies, the individual, that is like the furthest, bit point you can get to. You literally cannot transfer that property anymore. That is the sole property. You own yourself. You cannot sell yourself. Even if you did sell yourself, you cannot. It's impossible to sell your future ego, as in like your future being, as in my future will always concede to this, to my will being your will. It's literally just a nonsensical thing. You can't really sell yourself. You can't. It just is not a... Until they find out a way to completely MK Ultra Manchurian candidate a human being, you can't literally sell yourself into slavery.
Right. I mean, at some point, your owner will want you to do something you don't want to do. And, of course, you're just by instinct, you're going to act against that. So, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. But what is kind of crazy here and interesting is that I was thinking, like, social contract here, where he's saying, well, nobody would ever enter into a contract. Like, you would not voluntarily, you would never sign like an actual contract saying, yes, government, I agree that you will tax me and use my money to bomb Iran or whatever. Like, nobody would ever do that, which is true. He's right about that.
Yeah, they're kind of leaning on social contract theory, and then he's also pointing out how absurd this contract is, that you would ever enter into this contract.
Right.
That I give up my decision-making forever and always, and I never had a choice in this. It just... No one would ever take this deal. Sorry, go on. I cut you
However,
off.
people do it and they don't push back on it, though. Like, you've never actually signed that contract, but a lot of people will use that. Like, people who are socialists essentially will use that argument still to defend taxation and stuff. So it's kind of interesting because in a way, those people have actually agreed to enslave themselves to that extent, at least. So I was kind of. That's where my mind went, and I was kind of laughing about this, even though he's talking about in like a libertarian society, one private defense firm would not really have, they wouldn't have a monopoly. At least they would not have a government-granted monopoly over anything. Like, they might be the only firm that provides that service in that area, and that's fine. Like, that could happen, but they wouldn't, actually have like a territorial monopoly by force, which is basically what he's talking about there.
Yeah, totally. All right, I'll finish the last paragraph. It wouldn't make sense for you to have a read it because we're just here at the end. Since Locke, liberals have tried to solve this internal contradiction through the makeshift of tacit, implicit, or conceptual agreements, contracts, or constitutions. Yet all these characteristically tortuous and confused attempts have only contributed to one and the same unavoidable conclusion that it is impossible to derive a justification for government from explicit contracts between private property owners. So essentially, he's, as we mentioned before, cutting back to social contract theory and the idea of how fucking ridiculous it is. And this is why you always hear these crazy arguments, oh, it's tacit, it's implicit, which, tacit, implicit is usually like for cases of someone who's like, I don't know, brain dead or something, or some sort of weird situation where like it's pretty clear like this is what they would want, but there's no way for them to show their will. So it's like,
yeah.
But the idea that government fills that is completely ludicrous because, as we covered in the previous paragraph, it's just kind of like, even just as simple as just looking at something as what the government is, even if you are to accept it at the base level of like the most justified reason for its existence. And so it's the idea of like to protect contracts, essentially private property agreements. Well, okay, well then now that assumes that I want to, as an individual person, I want to give up that ability to make contracts for the rest of my life, and I also want to pass that on to my children as if I somehow have the ability to do so, and they'll never be able to make their own contracts for things specifically in regards to protection of their own property.
Right.
And they're also somehow now having to be stolen from in order to fund this in perpetuity. So it's just kind of the idea that if anyone was given this contract, they would be like, well, no, the very least I want to look into other options, perhaps other people do, but this isn't how this works. So so it's like, oh, well, if you want other, then you're like, oh, so this is a voting program. It's just no one would accept this. It's a ludicrous contract for any individual to ever accept.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. Yeah.
Well, all right then. Toad, where can people find you at?
Right.
We're done.
We stopped at, yeah, you're right. We stopped at that number 4 there. We'll do the next last half of that chapter in the next episode.
I have a feeling the next chapter is going to be a little bit more dense. We'll have more commentary because this first episode, the first part of this chapter is just kind of laying down the term, like the laying down the terms, just kind of setting up the stage. So I think it'll get a little bit more interesting in the second half. I think the second half episode will probably be a decent bit longer. But did you already drop all your plugs, or did I cut you off there in accident?
I did not. Learn to Toad on Twitter. You can still support the now on hiatus or defunct Tower Gang podcast. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. If you want to go back and watch all the old bonus content, you can still do that if you want to. And Better Off Dead, BETTOR, is my sports betting show, which I do every day until I die or whatever. So not having a great day on that one today, by the way, which sucks because I had more viewers this morning than I have before. So we're having a while.
Hell yeah. Well, you got the old Bro Grove bump.
Oh yeah, maybe a little bit of a Bro Grove bump. Yeah, so Bro Grove, you can also check that out, Bohemian Grove, which I attended. You can go to Nephilim Death Squad's Patreon there and get that, and you can get all the footage from that, which I think only doesn't include Sam Tripoli's set. I think everything else is included in it, though.
Cool. So which is, to be fair, I mean, that is a common practice among comedians. So
Owen just said fuck it and let his show.
I mean, he doesn't he doesn't tour like that though, so he probably just didn't give a shit.
Right. Yeah.
So it totally makes sense. Whereas Sam's like a regular touring comedian. So
right. Exactly.
But yeah, for those who want to support what I do over here. If you don't want to chip any money, you can leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. You can follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose. I don't know if that'll be my @ later. Who knows? Maybe it'll keep the same. We have no idea what's going on with Tower Gang. Who knows? Maybe we'll get the gang back together in some form, one form or another. I'm not sure if that includes me or not. I mean, I don't know. If anything, I kind of do hope it lives on in some form, I guess, maybe. But if you do want to directly support the show with money, I like money, give me money. Patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. The lowest level is $2. That's where you get access to early episodes, just like this one. This was a paywalled episode. If you're watching this one that went public, you could have got it weeks ago. So I've been doing 1 to 2 episodes a week lately. I think I've been doing 3 this week, and I've been doing keep about 4 at a time behind the paywall. So it's weeks of paywalled content for you guys. Also, you can ad-free RSS feed, and you get access to the pre-show and get priority for the call-ins on me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on both of our platforms. And I think that's it. Also, my sponsors, I read them off every episode. I think you're still a sponsor, Toad. So my former co-host on Tower Gang, hopefully maybe future, we'll see. I have no idea what's going on.
I cut a lot of my Patreon stuff because I'm trying to conserve money, but I left you. So
oh hell yeah, dude, that's sweet. Aw.
I leave the Tower Gang guys. I left that, but that was about it.
I'm gonna have to change I'm gonna have to change the ad on here. I still have Tower Gang Toad. So at Learn to Toad. Then I also have at Abrogate D, at ZOVRECK, at _Infinite Zeal, Tim Tuttle, at John Klebold, Will Bell, Delicious Blueberry Rabbit Eye Wine, big fan of the show, Torrin May, and then Jordan Pearson. With that, guys, we're out of here.
What?
It's one of the patrons. One of the patrons insisted. They're like, "Will you say who I am? Whoever you want me to say I am?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine." Right. So
Abrogate Deeds, by the way, I think we both hung out with him.
I hung out with
weekend, him. Right? Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, holler at Abrogate. I don't know if you watched the series, bud, but it was a nice hanging out with him. He actually hung out with us. He got to hang out with me, Sam, Josie, Austin, and he helped us set up the thing because we were having technical issues. So he was helping us in the thing set it up. So it's pretty cool. Great guy. Nice meeting you, Abrogate out there. With that, though, we're going to go get out of here. Appreciate you joining me, Toad. We'll have to do another one of these very soon. And with that, we are out. My Wednesdays are free, so we're out of here.
We'll see. Yeah. Peace.
Bye-bye.